Good evening and happy St. Patty's Day. And welcome to this evening's event, I See You, Navigating Free Speech and Civil Discourse. My name is Mike Weaver, and I'm the Executive Director of the Bradley Study Center at Virginia Tech. The Bradley Study Center exists to engage students and faculty with the riches of the living Christian intellectual tradition and explore what that faith tradition might have to offer to the academic disciplines and to the university itself. We are excited to be partnering with the Virginia Tech Office for Inclusion and Diversity and the Division of Student Affairs to sponsor the event this evening, along with the Departments of Political Science, Religion and Culture, and the Kellogg Center for Philosophy, Politics, and Economics. Thank you to all who have helped to make this event possible. I'm sure you will agree with me that our society and our world have had two very difficult years. In addition to the stresses and frustrations that have come out of experiencing a disruptive global pandemic, the political and cultural life of the nation and the world has been contested on a number of fronts. New fractures in our society have revealed themselves, and many of us find it increasingly difficult to have authentic conversations with people who might disagree on issues that are important to us. And many of our political leaders seem incapable of modeling the kind of respectful discourse that is so needed for a flourishing society. Given all of these challenges, how can we bridge real differences while maintaining meaningful relationships and respectful conversation? Is it possible to have vigorous free expression, something at the very heart of a democracy and a robust university life, while demonstrating genuine respect towards others? These are the weighty questions we hope to raise tonight. Our two guests are close friends, and they have divergent and deeply held beliefs and perspectives on a variety of important questions. Tonight, we will engage some of those questions and consider how we might shape our common life in a way that we all can flourish. We hope you will enjoy the conversation. So this is how our evening will proceed. After some interaction with our guests, interaction between our guests, we will open the conversation to you, our audience, both in person and live online. We will take questions from you electronically, and our moderator will incorporate some of your questions into the dialogue. As you entered the auditorium, you received a piece of paper with instructions on how to submit a question, and if you're online, that information should be on the webcast page. So before we meet our guests, let me introduce Dr. Cyril Clark, Executive Vice President and Provost, who would like to offer a few remarks. Provost Clark.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Weaver. It is a distinct pleasure to have this opportunity on behalf of Virginia Tech, really to welcome you all to what is going to be a really interesting and exciting event. And of course, it's my distinct pleasure to welcome our two very highly esteemed and distinguished guests, Dr. Cornel West and Dr. Robert George. So this is important for Virginia Tech because this is an opportunity for us to see a fantastic example amongst two colleagues in terms of how to really converse, how to interact, how to address possibly difficult issues, but in the context of the respect and the civility that we are called to at our institution in accordance with our principles of community. And so how do we do that at this institution? How do we create an environment within which that discussion can happen? The necessary discussion where an exchange of views is not just an exchange of differences in intellectual thought, but sometimes that intellectual thought is embedded in passion and personal experience. How do we do that? Well, from an institutional viewpoint, as I think you appreciate, we do that in accordance with our principles of community, understanding that it's important for us to be able to express our views. It's probably even more important for us to listen to other opposing views, and to do so in the context of mutual respect and civility. And institutionally, we also guard against external and other interference in terms of our commitment to academic freedom. But I can tell you that in the context of what we as an institution are striving to achieve. But what you're going to see this evening is that behavior modeled. And I know that because I've just had the distinct pleasure of having dinner with a small group, including our two guests. And this was a very fascinating experience for me. The level of the conversation, that engaging philosophy and sociology and current experiences was, I assure you, quite a few notches above the experience of this cow doctor. But having said that, I can tell you also that what I really saw was an interaction with two individuals who, based on their scholarship and based on their writings, I'm sure have many opposing views, and in some cases diametrically opposing views. But what I saw was the sense of communion and fellowship and mutual respect that was absolutely remarkable. And we're going to see some of that this evening, I'm quite sure. So thank you again for being part of this event. I'm very excited to again be a listener to our very distinguished guests. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Provost Clark. And now please welcome our guests to the platform. Let me introduce our guests and moderators for this evening's conversation. Dr. Robert George is McCormick Professor of Jurisprudence and Director of the James Madison Program in American Ideals and Institutions at Princeton University. He has served as Chairman of the United States Commission on International Religious Freedom, and before that on the President's Council of Bioethics, and as a presidential appointee to the United States Commission on Civil Rights. He has also served as a U.S. member of UNESCO's World Commission on the Ethics of Scientific Knowledge and Technology. He is a former judicial fellow at the Supreme Court of the United States, where he received the Justice Thomas C. Clark Award. A graduate of Swarthmore College, he holds a JD degree from Harvard University and a DPhil from Oxford University. Dr. Cornel West is the Dietrich Bonhoeffer Chair at Union Theological Seminary in New York City. Dr. West teaches on the works of Dietrich Bonhoeffer, as well as courses in the philosophy of religion, African American critical thought, and a wide range of subjects, including the classics, philosophy, politics, cultural theory, literature, and music. Dr. West is the former professor of the practice of public philosophy at Harvard University and professor emeritus at Princeton University, where he obtained his MA and PhD in philosophy. Having written a number of books, he is best known for two classics, Race Matters and Democracy Matters. Dr. West is a frequent guest on The Bill Maher Show, CNN, C-SPAN, and Democracy Now! Our moderator this evening is Dr. Sylvester Johnson, the founding director of the Virginia Tech Center for Humanities. Dr. Johnson is a nationally recognized humanities scholar specializing in the study of technology, race, religion, and national security. He is also Assistant Vice Provost for the Humanities at Virginia Tech and Executive Director of the university's Tech for Humanity initiative. Dr. Johnson has a PhD and an MA in Contemporary Religious Thought from Union Theological Seminary in New York. And now, I'll pass the mic to our moderator, Dr. Johnson.
Thank you so much for that kind introduction, and I am delighted to be in conversation and to moderate what's going to be a delightful discussion tonight with Professor Cornel West and Professor Robert George. This conversation is one that will model the civility and the respect that we really need today in our society. And I want to ask you both to begin by responding to this question. How did you first come to know one another and develop such a rich friendship?
Well, first, let me say thank you to Professor Johnson for moderating our discussion this evening, and thanks to Mike Weaver and the Bradley Study Center for hosting Brother Cornel and myself. I also want to say what a joy and delight it is, as always, to be together with my dear brother, Professor West. We've been together, but it's been on Zoom for a long time, so it's a joy to be together here in person. So thank you for allowing that to happen. And it's good to be here in Blacksburg, good to be in Western Virginia. As Cornel knows, I grew up just over the mountains in West Virginia. And we always thought of the folk in Western Virginia as our cousins, our fancy, rich, well-educated. We always sort of looked up to them. But I played a lot of bluegrass music as a boy. I'm a bluegrass banjo player and continue to play a lot of bluegrass music. And I can't tell you how much I enjoyed the summers when I'd be able to play the festivals in places like Culpeper and Galax and Berryville in these mountains. So this is a very special place to me, and I had such wonderful feelings of nostalgia as we were flying in today over these mountains. Well, Brother West and I first met shortly after he arrived at Princeton. I was already there. Not that I'm the older of the twins here. I'm a little younger. But Professor West had begun at Union Theological Seminary and then spent a little stint at Yale before coming to Princeton. So by the time he got to Princeton, I was already there. And we knew each other because we were together in faculty seminars. We were interested in exactly the same questions of religion, ethics, philosophy, politics, law. So we were in some of the same discussion groups. And I have to tell you, I was always impressed by the brother. What really stood out for me is that here was the guy who was asking the right questions, the deep questions, getting beyond, the show-offy academic pyrotechnics that when academics get together they like to do with you. You know what I'm talking about. Brother Cornel was drilling down. Now, I didn't think he always got the right answers, but man, he was getting the right questions. And for you young folks out there, getting the right questions is 95% of the battle. Most of the way we go wrong is getting the questions wrong. It's not necessarily getting the answers wrong. You got to get the answers right, you got to get the questions right. And Cornel was modeling even then getting the questions right. But we didn't really get to know each other well. We were merely, I would say, friendly, very friendly acquaintances. A lot of mutual respect, but really acquaintances. Until one day in about 2005, Cornel?
Yeah, about 2005.
When one of our students, a wonderful student, brilliant student, he had studied in Professor West's religion classes, and he'd studied in my moral and political and legal philosophy classes, came to me one day in my office hours, and he said he wanted to talk with me about a project that he and some of his friends were involved with. It was creating a new campus journal, a new magazine. I think it was called The Green Light.
Green Light.
The Green Light. And as a regular feature, starting with the inaugural issue of the magazine, the editors wanted to have one Princeton faculty member interview another Princeton faculty member. So he said that they had invited Professor Cornel West to be the interviewer for the inaugural issue, and they had asked him to suggest someone that he would like to interview. And so the student, whose name was Andrew said, he said, Professor George, that he would like to interview you. So I'm here to ask you whether you would be willing to be interviewed by Professor West. Well, I was very flattered that a man of Professor West's eminence would pick little old me from West Virginia out of that crowd of distinguished professors at Princeton, the Nobel Prize winners and all, to interview. So I was very, very flattered. So of course I accepted that invitation. And the appointed day came, and Professor West and Andrew showed up at my office for the interview. They had a photographer. He must have snapped about 2,000 pictures. It was snap, 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 snap for the entire time. And it was supposed to be an hour-long interview. Andrew had an old-fashioned cassette tape recorder, half hour on one side, half hour on the other. But we ran that tape out after an hour. We were in it hot and heavy. We were arguing, debating, going at it, every issue you can think of. And the time went on, but we didn't notice the time going on. We had started about 2 o'clock. I noticed my watch, and it's 6 o'clock. I said, well, Brother Cornel, we've been going for 4 hours. Said, my wife, Cindy, is going to wonder what happened to me. I need to get home for dinner. And he said, well, Brother Robbie, this has been such a wonderful experience getting to know you, and we really need to get to know each other better. We need to arrange to have lunch. Let's get together again soon. I said, well, that would be wonderful. I'd love to do that. And I said, well, I'm just parked down here by the Princeton University Press. Why don't you walk me down? We can talk on our way to the car. So we walked down to the car, and there I was for another 45 minutes with my hand on the latch, but we couldn't stop. Then just a week or 10 days after that, we got a note. All the senior faculty got a note from our dean of the college saying that Princeton was very proud of its freshman seminar program, giving an opportunity to freshmen to study, not just with our graduate students or our younger faculty, but with some of our more senior, more distinguished faculty. She said the only problem is none of these senior distinguished faculty are volunteering to teach the seminars, so she wanted to encourage us to volunteer to teach freshman seminars. Well, the light bulb went off over my head, and I thought, gee, wouldn't it be wonderful if Brother Cornel and I could do a seminar together? We'd have that kind of a conversation involving these 16 brilliant young Princeton freshmen. So I suggested to Brother Cornel, and he immediately said, yes, that's a wonderful idea. And so we got in touch with the dean and said, we'll do it. She was pleased. We were pleased. And so we taught our first seminar together. Cornel chose 6 books that were important and meaningful to him. I chose 6 that were important in my own intellectual and spiritual odyssey. We found we had not only overlapping interests, but we also had authors that were important to us. Sophocles, we read the Antigone. Plato, we read the Gorgias. Augustine, we read much of the Confessions, all the way up into the 19th century. John Stuart Mill, Newman, Marx, 20th century, Hayek, John Dewey, C.S. Lewis, Abolition of Man, Martin Luther King, letter from Birmingham jail. And from the moment we entered that classroom, Cornel, you say if I'm lying, the moment we entered that classroom and started that seminar together, the magic was there. The chemistry, you either have that chemistry or you don't when you're teaching together, and man, did we have it. And so we just had a wonderful time. The students seemed to have a wonderful time. And so we just stayed at it until he abandoned me and went to Harvard. But even then, he came back. God bless him, he came back. First time he got a leave of absence, he came back and we taught together again. And then we took our show on the road, didn't we? Going to wonderful places like Virginia Tech. Anyway, I talked too much, Cornel. You tell your version of the story.
No, it's so true.
You get it all right?
But he's a masterful teacher, even when he's wrong. I tell you. Oh, yes. No, indeed. I love him on the deep levels, never reducible just to politics or agreement on public policy. You can revel in the humanity of another person. As a friend, as a brother, and our families have come together in marvelous ways. But I do want to salute Brother Provost Cyril Clark for his presence and his powerful words, and his wife who is here. And Brother Mike Weaver, we've had such wonderful conversations already with he and Jim earlier today. And especially you, my brother. I'm telling you, just be able to sit on the same stage. I was saying earlier, I was on a committee at Harvard that offered him a job at Harvard. He said, no, I want to stay at Virginia Tech. I said, I want to meet this brother. I want to meet this. And all Virginia Tech is where I'm staying. I said, oh, okay, I may have to leave Harvard myself, but that was integrity, man, of a deep level. And of course, your beloved wife, Heather, who's also a distinguished graduate of Union Seminary. But no, what I love about this brother, and yourself as well, but I know him much longer than you, is that he says what he means and he means what he says. There's no posing and posturing. He's not a fake and he's not a phony. And that's very important because, you know, we've got a professional managerial class that is so obsessed with career rather than calling, and so obsessed with getting over rather than keeping deep spiritual and moral values in place. I'm trying to move up, upward mobility. You say to yourself, oh, I just want to win the rat race. Well, the winner of a rat race is still a rat. Still a rat. What kind of integrity, honesty, decency, generosity, what kind of risks are you willing to take? What kind of burdens are you willing to bear? That's the question. And the reason why I asked him for that interview was from our dialogues at a distance. I said to myself, he's not one of these typical upwardly mobile professional managers trying to impress by means of spectacle rather than deep success, even when he's wrong. And right. And we discovered, it's been what now, 15, 17 years?
Yeah.
17 years. Wrestling with issues together, reading texts together, and he plays a serious bluegrass, and I sing rhythm and blue, at least in the shower. But I won't talk about it in public. But, and I want to acknowledge, too, my dear sister, Nika Giovanni. Anytime I come to Virginia Tech, oh, she just, the truth on its way enrich my life in so many of her poems. And I say that in regard to what it means to be a blues woman or a jazz man. You see, you can't be a blues woman and a great poet the way she is by being a fake. You have to be for real. And it's a beautiful thing. Let's give it up for our dear sister. Let's give it up for our dear sister. And this is a very important point for young brothers and sisters of all colors, all genders, all sexual orientations, all religious and non-religious identities. You see, you're living in a culture of such spiritual decay and moral decrepitude that issues of integrity pushed to the margin, and everybody wearing a mask and weaponizing whatever they can in order to gain access to a mainstream, to live in some vanilla suburb and have some grand space and think that somehow that's living. How empty, how vacuous it really is, you see. And all of us are in process so that we're not ever the real thing, but we're both together trying to be as real as we can given our finite, fallible, and fallen selves. And that's what I love about my brother. Now, of course, he's Catholic, and I'm hang loose Baptist. So he's got Aquinas working, and I got Kierkegaard dipped in the blues and jazz and a little hip-hop sometimes. And that Danish hip-hop hybridity is a fascinating thing. We won't get into that right now. But the important thing is being oneself. And it takes courage. That's what we love about Socrates. He wasn't fake. The sophists were.
No, that's great. And you raised something that I want to ask you about because you both share a few things in common, among which is your Christian faith. Can you tell us how that informed your work in the academy and how it's shaped your friendship with each other?
Well, I'll get there, but first I just want to italicize some points that Cornel has put out here. One, especially, again, I'm sorry to preach to you young folk, but I don't get too many chances, so let me preach a little bit. One is just the importance of integrity. I mean, at the foundation of our friendship, what I most admire, there's so much to admire about Cornel. He's our nation's leading public intellectual, he's a deep thinker, serious scholar. And that's so important, I admire that. But the thing I admire most is the integrity. Because, man, it's water in the desert. It's rare as diamonds and every bit as precious. And when it's hard to find and you find somebody like that, and that person becomes your friend, man, that's the best thing there is. And then I want to underline or italicize a second virtue that Cornel mentioned, which is courage. And I've seen him exemplify it. There have been times when he's had to put himself at risk. I don't mean the times you probably heard about, you know, protesting and being arrested and going to jail, the witness he gives to the causes he believes in. I mean something much harder than that. That is jeopardizing friendships, relationships that matter to him. That means putting at risk his standing in movements that he's associated with. When the moment comes, as it will come for anybody who's a person of principle, when you have to say, no, I'm not going along with that. If this is our team's decision, count me out. I want to be a good team player when I can, but when you cross my conscience, I can't go there. You can be quickly, can't you, Cornel? You can be quickly excommunicated. All the stuff, all the glory, they used to lionize, they used to praise you, they used to haul you out in front of the audiences and so forth. And all of a sudden, you're forgotten. You're erased. You're canceled. You vanish. Cornel's been willing to do that. And when a price has had to be paid, he's been willing to pay that price. I mean, that's integrity, and that is courage. And I'll tell you how you got that courage. It's when your values are right. Cornel's talking about that. It's when your values are right, you know what really matters. It's nice to have status. It's nice to be looked up to. It's nice to have celebrity. It's nice to have wealth. It's nice to have power. It's nice to have influence. It's nice to have social standing. Those things aren't bad. Don't anybody tell you they're bad. You can do good things with them. But they're not good in themselves. They are merely instrumentally valuable. They are not what's intrinsically and ultimately valuable. What's intrinsically and ultimately valuable are things like faith, family, friendship, integrity, honor, decency, compassion. And when you've got those things lined up, it's easier to exemplify that courage that we're talking about. And then the third virtue I want to italicize here, and again, Cornel exemplifies it, models it, helps inspire me when I need a little help. I need somebody to look up to. Honesty. Being willing to tell the truth when it's unpopular. Not just unpopular with the people you disagree with. That's easy. When they're wrong and you can tell the truth about what they disagree with, that's fine. And the people on your side, they're going to pat you on the back and tell you how great you are. What happens, though, when honesty means speaking up to the folks on your own side and saying, I'm not on board with this. This is wrong. Man, that's something. Now, again, I mean, it's not that every Christian or any Christian lives up really all that well to the demands of these virtues like integrity and honesty and courage. I mean, every Christian is supposed to be prepared to be a martyr at any moment. I don't think too many of us are. I'm certainly not one of those. But we should have that kind of courage. And yet, it gives us the ideal to strive for and an account of why that is in fact the ideal. You've been purchased and at a price. Been purchased and at a price. It reminds you of something else really important. You're not God. Somebody else is God. God is God, thank God. You're not God. And you're not meant to do God's job. You do your job. Let God do God's job. And then there's the question of that spiritual bond. It can be corrupted, of course. It can lead to bad things. It can give people pride and even prejudice. But if those vices can be avoided, that spiritual bond is so powerful and fundamental, I don't think there's anything else like it in the universe. And there's no question, Sylvester, when you ask, well, what can make a friendship like Cornel's and mine work, despite the differences that we have on political issues and so forth? That spiritual bond rooted in a shared Christian faith, I'd be lying to you if I told you that didn't matter. That crucially matters. Now, I think even if we didn't have that, all the rest of the stuff I'm telling you about would still be true.
That's true.
But the depth that provides, that spiritual bond provides, is really something. Even though we're on opposite sides of that Reformation line, and so part of our critique of each other is Cornel sees me as a bit too much of an Aristotelian Thomistic rationalist. And he's on that Kierkegaardian leap of faith side, which tempts me to think is a little bit too irrationalist. But we can overcome that. It's another thing to argue about.
We pray for each other. We pray for each other. And learn from each other.
That's important too, man.
That's
You just laid it on the line.
important.
You know, you want to be friends with people you can learn from.
Absolutely.
That's so important. You shouldn't make agreement the litmus test of the friendship, even about important things. It's nice to agree on important, especially on important things. But in a way even more important than that is, can you learn from somebody? And you learn sometimes more from reasonable people of goodwill, especially highly intelligent, serious people of goodwill. You learn more from those you disagree with than from those you agree with.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. You know, I think one of the great philosophical texts in Europe of the 18th century was written by a figure named Vico, The New Science.
Giambattista Vico.
Oh, what a classic. And he begins not with death, he begins with corpses. And he says, this is where humando, humanity, our word human comes, humando, burial, burying, that's Latin. And so he begins with the ways in which we human beings, wrestling with what it means to be human with humility, tied to the conscious that we're on our way to the culinary delight of terrestrial worms. Nobody escapes. You see. So that all of a sudden now you got deep education, not just cheap schooling. Cheap schooling is about the skill and going to get a job. We want everybody to have a wonderful skill and get a job, fine. Deep schooling is what kind of human being are you going to choose to be? So then he connects family and faith, religion. Very much what Robbie was talking about, you see. Not because any particular interpretation of Christianity or Judaism or Buddhism has a full-fledged monopoly on truth, but one does have to take a stand. Where will one locate and situate oneself in relation to these various traditions that are trying to get us to conceive of what it means to be human, given the fact that our bodies are vanishing entities, regardless of what happens with our souls. Now see, at that point, you've got serious possibilities for education. Not just because you got people's attention, but because you're speaking some deep truths. No, I'm not going to die. Oh, well, okay, go on and live your life and stuff. Okay, get off the crack pipe. We understand. All right. No, we don't have a lot of space for mendacity here, but we have patience, which means none of us are fully right because we're cracked vessels. But Vico ends that text saying, my conception of the new science, which is his science of history and science of mythology, is tied to piety. Piety. Now see, piety has a very bad name these days, late modern, postmodern, post-structuralist times. Nobody wants to talk about piety. But what is piety? It's not uncritical deference to dogma. It's not blind obedience to doctrine. It is the wise and virtuous acknowledgement of the good in our lives that we have been dependent on. It begins with mama. I've taught in prison for 42 years. The first thing I tell my brothers, how many here would take a bullet for your mama? They all stand up. I say, I got the right crowd. Because I got a hook. They got something bigger than themselves. They got something called love, compassion, service, sacrifice. And what Vico was saying was that very much like our deep brotherhood and friendship, you see, piety is how we orient ourselves in the present in light of our acknowledgement of the sources for good in our lives that has shaped us. That takes me to Irene B. West, my mother, just passed. Never forget her. Never be the human being she was. My father takes me to Reverend Willie P. Cook, pastor, Shiloh Baptist Church. And he wasn't a CEO of a church. He was a real pastor. He was a real pastor, you know what I mean? There are some left, you know what I mean? Not mega churches, he had mega love in a small church. Oh yes, mega love, little small church. Mega courage in a small church. The real thing, you see. And it spills over to teachers of different colors. Second grade teacher, fourth grade teacher, never forget them. That's piety enacted, you see. And it's the very things that allows us to stay on the love train. And by love, I mean not just loving neighbor, but pursuit of truth, and the love of truth. That's what brings us together. Love of beauty. It's guitar. It's got moments of beauty. It's not like Aretha Franklin. That's all right. It's not Luther Vandross. That's all right. It's bluegrass. Still sounds good. Hank Williams, Vanilla, Blues man, B.B. King. Chocolate,
Yes.
blues man. But the blues, what's the blues about? Wrestling with catastrophe. Everybody got to deal with catastrophe. Catastrophe is on its way to everybody's house.
Yeah.
It's not just our precious brothers and sisters in Ukraine right now.
Yeah.
Oh, what catastrophe. That's us at our worst. Greed, hatred, violence, innocent people killed. But on a human continuum, catastrophe. And that's what we've been blessed to wrestle with in both the text and our conversations. But we do it, try to do it with a style and a smile. But what we're talking about are life and death issues. They really are, not just our own deaths, but the deaths of our other fellow human beings wherever they are. It could be in Ukraine, it could be indigenous peoples in the New World, it could be Dalits in India, it could be Roma, it could be Jews in Russia and France, it could be Muslims or Palestinians. Any human being made in the image of God has a kind of pricelessness and preciousness. That's what brings us together. Even as we have our different conclusions, as we wrestle with the arguments, the interpretations, and the narratives.
So let's talk a little bit about some of those differences that you have. I'm wondering if each of you could share with us a particular issue, a topic on which you clearly disagree, but through which your friendship has actually enabled you to be able to closely engage each other.
Well, in case you're wondering which is which, I'm George, I'm the conservative, he's West, he's the progressive. So as a conservative, I am friendly to markets, not uncritically friendly. I don't think markets should be deified. I don't embrace, although I respect the libertarian position on markets. I think markets can appropriately be and need to be regulated. And a point on which Cornel and I certainly agree is that markets need to function within moral boundaries, within moral frames. The market just in itself will buy and sell anything to anybody. There needs to be some moral boundaries. It needs to be a shaping by moral principles. We can't simply count on the market to work its magic to produce morally good outcomes, even perfectly just outcomes. But having said all that, I still believe in markets. Where possible, I want to allow the market to distribute resources rather than have a central command economy. I've been persuaded by Hayek, Friedrich Hayek, that that's correct, that the market's going to do a better job, all things considered, than government, than central power, than command. And I think that markets, when they are properly regulated and function properly, have lifted millions of people out of poverty across the world and can continue to do that, or do that even better. So I'm a critic of socialism. Cornel is the honorary chairman of Democratic Socialists of America. So we're in different places there. Yet, through these discussions, I've come to understand better what the limitations of markets are. And I've come to understand that Cornel, in embracing what he calls socialism, does not mean that he finds no place for the market. Although he tends to, you can speak for yourself, but he tends to see markets as a necessary evil, where I tend to see them as a positive good when properly regulated. So as we've had these discussions over the years, we've found that if you just forget about the labels and just talk about realities, forget about capitalism, socialism, and all the bells that ring and the connotations and so forth, and you just get down to the cases and how should this operate here. And you take into account, in defending markets as I do, the principle that those of you who've studied philosophy will recognize under the label, the principle of subsidiarity, the idea that problems should be solved for people at the lowest level, where the individual can solve the problem, let the individual do it. Where the individual can't, that's the role of the family. Where the family can't, that's the role of the church, the community association, the institutions of civil society, what Burke called the little platoons, what Tocqueville noticed and celebrated as so essential to American democracy. And then when you can't solve the problem there, then you have an appropriate role for government. But even then, it should be government at the lowest level, closest to the people, more responsive, more accountable to the people. If it can be done by local government, let local government do it. Don't kick it up to provincial or state or county. If you can't resolve that problem at that level, then kick it up to and if finally you can't resolve it at the regional or state or provincial level, then central government has its appropriate role. So we disagree in important ways about the role of markets, but not nearly as radically as you would think if all you heard was that Robert George is a conservative and Cornel West is honorary chairman of Democratic Socialists of America. So talk to us. So the message, the general message to draw from that is, don't just rely on labels. Don't just categorize or classify people. When you hear the word, you hear a name like Hayek, or you hear a name like Keynes when you're studying, don't just slot them into categories. Actually read the stuff, or if it's a living human being, you have an opportunity to talk to the person and get hold of the nuances. Things are not as straightforward and firmly categorized. The lines aren't as bright and clear as you would imagine them to be.
Absolutely, and that's so very important, because we live in a moment of such polarization, and in some ways gangsterization, which means there's massive distrust of one another and increasing despair of actually communicating across ideological lines, political lines, religious lines, racial lines, sexual, gender lines, and sexual orientational lines, and so forth. But when you really try to get at another human being, you discover they are very complicated creatures. Just scratch beneath the label and have a conversation, and you recognize, oh, I didn't know that about you. You don't say, you never asked. Oh, I thought that you were that kind of right-wing so-and-so. No, you just saw me on Monday. You didn't see me the rest of the week. You see, oh, I thought you were some some fiery left-wing so-and-so. No, that was Friday afternoon. You didn't see me Sunday morning when I was worshiping my sweet Jesus. You see, everybody has multiple identities, a variety of different elements that constitute who they are, and it's messy. I come from a great people, black folk, who in the face of so much hatred have produced love warriors every generation. But those love warriors are also funk masters. The George Clintons and the James Browns and the Betty Davises. And a funk master has a deep suspicion of deodorized discourse. Sanitized, sterilized. That's the superficial discourse of labels and categories. But if you really want to get into the humanity, you got to get into people's funk, or what Samuel Beckett called the mess. That's his favorite word. The mess. That's the word he uses to substitute Dasein of Heidegger, being. Heidegger has Dasein, Beckett has the mess, George Clinton has the funk. Which is what? Keeping it real. All the contradictions and incongruities shot through who we are as human beings, no one of us pure, pristine, free of spot or wrinkle. That's just basic truth. But it's hard for people to accept. Very difficult. And for me, the isms, when I talk with Brother Robbie, I don't look at Brother Robbie and see a conservative Catholic so-and-so. We wrestling with same-sex marriage, we wrestling with abortion, we wrestling with markets. No, I see a fellow human being, a brother, trying to make sense of the world the best way he can in light of what's available to him, given being shaped in magnificent places like West Virginia. And I say that with a straight face. Don't mock West Virginia now. No, not at all. But I think Bill Withers come out of West Virginia, right?
Absolutely did. Skip Gates,
Well, I mean, Skip's all right, but Bill Withers. We love Skip to death, but Bill Withers is on another level. I'm just kidding. You know, I'm just kidding. Yeah, exactly. But he's keeping it. But he's just honest. And see, that cannot be downplayed in a superficial time in which we live. People aren't as honest as they ought. So that as a Christian, I say to myself, I noticed that it's very few churches that have a picture of Jesus running out the money changers of the temple. Right? Very few churches. Is anybody a member of the church that has a big picture of that?
We have stained glass window.
We got stained. But I say that because, see, Jesus is not doing that in the name of some ism.
Yeah, that's right.
Brother Robbie hates poverty. I hate poverty. He thinks Marxists can contribute. Fine. To the degree to which they do, I embrace. To the degree to which they don't, I have critical questions. Right. If he sees that my own attempt to engage in too much government intervening is reproducing poverty, I've got to call that into question.
There we go.
It's not an ism. Right. Concrete human beings made in the image of God out there catching hell. They don't have access to health care, quality education, decent housing. That's the issue, you see. And when you look at it in that way, it's like Fannie Lou Hamer. Fannie Lou Hamer's not concerned about what this ideology is functioning in rural Mississippi. She wants to know what kind of public policies are being generated such that these precious folk who are wrestling with poverty can live lives of decency and dignity. And that's always an experimental question. Which, by experimental, I mean there's no rigid, dogmatic response to it. Okay. And that's something that is very important, I think, for young folk to wrestle with.
Can I add something to that? So people will sometimes ask, well, how do you go about trying to persuade Cornel of this? How do you go about trying to convince Cornel? And that just misunderstands what's going on in our conversations, even those conversations which aren't about the abstract philosophical issues, which many of our conversations admittedly are, but even those that are about policy issues. I don't see my job as persuading or convincing Cornel of anything. Our conversations are all about deepening understanding. So I may be advocating a point of view, but it's not with a view to persuading him like winning a debate, a competitive debate. I'm in that conversation for the same reason he's in that conversation with me. We're both, by a dialectical, what the Greeks might call a dialectical method, trying to get at the truth of the thing. It's not a question of persuading him. It's trying to get at the truth. I know he's trying to get at the truth. He knows I'm trying to get at the truth. I'm defending one side of a proposition. He's defending another side of the proposition. Neither of us are invested in getting the other guy to agree with us. That's just not part of the story, is it, Cornel? What we're trying to do is get to the truth of the matter. If he's got a better argument, I need to change my mind. If I've got a better argument, he needs to change his mind. The truth might be somewhere in between, or he may have some aspects of it right and I have them wrong. I might have some aspects of it right and he has it wrong. But it's just a different approach to conversation than I think we have come to take as a given. That all conversation is about is me trying to persuade you and you trying to persuade me. And I'm going to try now, this is my first shot at this, Cornel, I've been thinking about it, a diagnosis. Why have we come to see discussion and debate basically as a competition about winning and losing? Persuading you, you persuading me. Why? Here's my stab at it. I think it's because people have lost faith in and therefore lost the love of truth. What they love are their own opinions. People have fallen so deeply in love with their own opinions, protecting their own turf, protecting their own tribe. Part of this is tied to tribalism. You know, being the advocate for the tribe, being the knight for the tribe. That truth has been put in the shade. is people just have lost the real faith that there's any truth there to find. Now, I think a true truth seeker is not going to be the dogmatist who says, I've got the truth, so you got to come along. It's going to be the person who, recognizing his own fallibility, knows he's wrong about some things. He knows he might be wrong about this. And so he wants to engage a thoughtful, serious, deep thinking person who sees it a little differently to see whether, in fact, he's got it right or we need some revision there. I think the loss of civil discourse is tied to the loss of faith in truth. Because once we're not having the truth as the common ground binding us together despite our differences, once we come to think of things this way, well, I believe X or I hold X because of my feelings, which are purely subjective and there's nothing to do about it. He differs because of his feelings. So there's no truth, just all a matter of feeling. This is a kind of Humean, Hobbesian version of the thing. Then it's just all about getting the other guy over to your side, by hook or by crook. Now we have, in the modern, diminished, pejorative sense, mere rhetoric. Now rhetoric, in the basest sense, has replaced philosophy. What is philosophy? Love of truth, love of wisdom. So part of the reform we need is to recover our faith in, and so we can have our love of truth. And once that's in place, then having civil discourse, having genuine love between people who just happen not to agree, even about important things, is possible.
Well, that's a powerful hypothesis. I look at it in this way, though. You remember that powerful line of the great Dostoevsky in the novel he finished right before he died, The Brothers Karamazov, which is a novel that every undergraduate at Virginia Tech I know has already read or will read before you die. It's that powerful. The Brothers Karamazov, Dostoevsky. I know these days all things Russians are to be trash. Give Dostoevsky a chance. Let the gangster Putin go. Give Dostoevsky a chance.
And notice this, just to interrupt, notice this. Here is a progressive icon, Cornel West, recommending to young folk the writings of a deeply conservative thinker.
He's a deep sea diver. He's a deep sea diver. But what he says is this. He says, hell is those who suffer from the incapacity to love. Now that's Hamlet. That's across. It's a little further to the west in England. That's Hamlet. Other than Horatio, it's clear that he suffers from the incapacity to love, the most sophisticated intellectual protagonist of all of modern European literature. And all you have to do is ask Sophia. And so when you talk about the winner-take-all attitude, which is in part the inability to engage in truth talk, but it has something to do with capacity. See, you have to see, paideia, deep education, is not just about getting the right view, it's the process of getting there. And you have to cultivate the capacity to involve yourself self-critically in a quest for truth and beauty and goodness, and if you're Christians like myself, in the holy. And if you haven't cultivated that capacity, then all you're looking for is push-button correctness. Push this button, I'm right. Push this button, I'm wrong. No. And this is why Socrates is so important. He's trying to teach us the process. Socrates never gets there, right? Socrates, what is piety in the Euthyphro? I'm not going to tell you, but follow me. Follow. What is justice in the Republic? 350 pages later. Follow me. I see my dear brother here in black, my dear Catholic brother. Augustine in the Confessions in his prayer to his God. Follow St. Augustine even after the conversion. That sinful nature persists in that way. It's the process in time, in space, and we lack the gifts required to cultivate the capacity for that. That's what happens in a spiritually decadent culture where the flattening of causes into brands. People come up to me all the time, Brother West, what's your brand? I don't got no damn brand. I got a cause. The kingdom of God is not a brand. The love of neighbor is not a brand. The love of enemy is not a brand. That's a cause. That's a calling. That's a vocation. Oh, really? You don't say. Because once you flatten that vocation into just profession, just getting over obsession with the 11th commandment, thou shalt not get caught. Oh, that's so much of our culture.
Yeah.
And it's not just Wall Street, it's everywhere.
Right.
It's everywhere.
Yeah.
That's what spiritual decadence is. And we have to call it for what it is. Not because it's in everybody else but us, but because it's in us too. It's in us too. Brother Robbie and I tell our students when they come to our class, you come here to learn how to die. And they say, ooh, I thought I was just trying to finish up a degree. Sorry, Professor George. Professor, am I in the right class? No, we're starting with Plato. Plato says philosophy is a meditation on preparation for death, but you learn how to die by calling into question your assumptions. And when you let go certain assumptions, that's a form of death so that rebirth takes place in you. That's what our Jewish brother Paul says in the New Testament for we Christians. Christians must do what? Learn how to die daily. That was the eulogy that the great Dorothy Day, one of the towering figures of the 20th century, wrote for Martin Luther King Jr., Catholic worker. April 5th, 1968, Martin Luther King Jr. learned how to die daily. Dropped the mic, walk away. That's all she had to say. Perennially involved in critical self-examinations, self-formation, ethical cultivation. And it's not a question of skin pigmentation. It's a question of spiritual formation and ethical cultivation and moral action. You see. And when it's cast in that way, it becomes a real challenge. Difficult, arduous. People don't like that kind of arduous task these days.
Yeah, well, there are lots of...
I just want to tell a little story. Can't help myself.
Yeah.
Tell a little story. Cornel and I experienced. The dean at Princeton invited us to speak to the freshmen and their parents on Freshman Family Day. You remember that?
Yeah, I remember.
So a big auditorium like this, and the dean built us up big introductions and so forth. And we got to talking like we're talking in front of you, and she asked us to talk about the purpose, the point of liberal arts education.
Okay.
And so I went first, and I said, well, you got to understand that the point of liberal arts education is not to make you comfortable, not to make the student learner comfortable. Quite the opposite.
That's right.
It's to unsettle the student. It's to shake them up. It's to cause them to question, cause them to doubt. It's a challenge. It's all about challenging. It's not just about feel good. It's not about making you feel good. It make you feel bad in some ways. Well, this wasn't enough to upset the parents. So then Cornel chimes in with the purpose of a liberal arts education is to learn how to die. And I saw every dad in that room turn to every mom in the room and say, $80,000. But Dr. Jones, Cornel and I have both, in our professional scholarly works, been critical of the 19th century British liberal philosopher I mentioned earlier, John Stuart Mill, a towering figure, one of the great figures. But both Cornel and I, Cornel from the left side, mine from the right side, have been critical of Mill's utilitarianism, of Mill's libertarianism. But there is a treatment of truth-seeking and its conditions in the second chapter of Mill's great work on liberty that encapsulates the sort of gospel that Cornel and I are trying to preach this evening about the importance of truth-seeking and about the conditions of truth-seeking. And let me just quickly outline it. Mill says, look, if two people disagree, serious people disagree about a serious matter, there are a limited number of possibilities. One, right? The first person could be right and the second person could be wrong. First person could be partially right, and the second person could be partially right. Second person could be entirely right, first person could be entirely wrong. Not a lot of other options. Well, if it turns out that you are the person who's wrong, and your intelligent, well-informed interlocutor can show you where the error of your thinking is, he hasn't done something bad to you. He hasn't defeated you. You shouldn't be ashamed and embarrassed. He has conferred upon you the greatest benefit someone can confer on another person. Move them from error to truth. If truth exists, and if truth has the value that every Socratic, every disciple of Socrates, including me, and Cornel and myself, believe about truth. And of course, same thing, if I'm partially wrong, even if I'm partially right, to the extent that I can move from being merely partially to being more completely and fully correct, he's still done a great service to me. So far from trying to shut him down or shun him or not have anything to do with him or not listen, or just listen in the sense of sit politely, blocking out everything he's saying until it's my turn to talk. That's mere polytest. That's not civil discourse. But how about the remaining possibility? Mill engages this straightforward. He takes it on. What if you're entirely right and your interlocutor, despite being a smart person, well-informed person, just completely wrong about this? Do you still have reason to talk with him? Do you still have reason to respect his right to freedom of speech? Do you still have reason to not shun him or deplatform him? Mill says you've got very good reasons not to. Because even if you're entirely right and he's entirely wrong, engaging with him, learning why even an intelligent, well-informed person can make an error like this, exploring the issue with him will enable you to move to a deeper and deeper understanding of the truth. After all, it's one thing, this goes back to something Cornel said a moment ago, it's one thing to know that something is the case so that you can push the right button, check the right box on the SAT. That's good, and if it's all you can get, fine. I mean, it's better than nothing. You know the truth in the sense of you know that this is the case, this is the right box to check. But isn't it something else and better and deeper and more important to know not only that something is the case, but why it is the case and how it is the case?
Absolutely.
And what the deeper, larger, even existential significance of its being the case is, or how it relates to other things that are the case. And that's what comes out of a deep conversation, even with a person who's entirely wrong. Now, you can imagine my views about Marxism. I'm not very friendly to Marxism. Ideology has piled up corpses like no ideology known to man before. And yet, I have learned from brilliant Marxist theorists, brilliant Marxist historians. The late Eugene Genovese, most of his life, the period of his greatest works, Roll, Jordan, Roll.
Absolutely.
During his Marxist period. I had the blessing of knowing him, as you did.
Oh, yes, he's wonderful.
Learned an enormous amount, even before he eventually abandoned Marxism. But even before he did, I was learning from the man. Not because he was right about the base and the superstructure and the relationship of the mode of a means of production to the mode of production and all the Marxist apparatus. It's because he had thought deeply about these things. He raised important questions. He was a thoughtful, serious, intelligent man. You'll learn from people like that, and it's such a blessing too. So don't try to shut people down. Don't try to shun people. Don't close your ears to people. Don't deplatform people. No, it doesn't mean you have to listen to everybody, every demagogue, every fool. But don't suppose that somebody is a fool or a demagogue just because they disagree with you. There will be serious people who are wrong, who disagree with you, and you're right, from whom you can nevertheless deeply learn.
These are really profound pieces of advice and strategies and indications for how we can advance the work of civil discourse in ways that you have modeled it. We have a few questions from our audience that I'm wondering if you could give some brief responses to. And one of those is about the two-party system, and it asks whether somehow reforming or weakening the two-party system and introducing something like ranked voting. Would this perhaps help to promote better civil discourse or create fewer divisions in our polities? So any thoughts about this?
Well, I know the late, great Lonnie Guinier just recently passed, first black woman professor at the law school at Harvard, wrote a whole book on this, proportional representation. It's a very courageous book, cutting radically against the grain, because it's hard to conceive of how our decrepit electoral political system at the moment is driven by big money. The quality of our leadership in both Republican and Democratic Party is just amazing to me when I look at all the creativity and imagination and intelligence among the American people, and then look at our politicians. And I say, what happened? What kind of hemorrhaging is taking place? You know, because you can go in local churches and communities and meet some of the highest quality people in the world. Then you go to Congress and you say, wow, it's beneath mediocrity. Not in every case, but in a whole lot of cases. You know what I mean? Now what's going on now? This is not just a matter of name calling, because, you know, they represent something about us. Just like you look at Brother Trump. Oh, Trump is a so-and-so. He's a gangster. He's a xenophobe. Well, yeah, we got evidence for that. But where's he come from? I've known Trump for 40 years. He was a gangster then. He's a gangster now. He's been consistent. He's very consistent. He's always himself. Right? But what is it about him at this particular moment? Well, so it is when it comes to leadership. So when you have a two-party system and you've got a Republican Party that is fearful of certain truths that have to do with dealing with organized greed. So you don't have to be a Marxist to say there's organized greed at the top. 1% of the population owns 40% of the wealth. In the last 9 months, they accrue trillions and trillions of dollars, and yet we got children that don't have access to resources. You don't have to be a Marxist to talk about that. That's just real. And when you go off into the business world, and you'll see organized greed run amok. Why? Because we're the kind of human beings, for the most part, if we don't have mechanisms of accountability, we're going to do things that go far beyond moral regulations. Brother Robbie's critical of that, just like he's critical of Trump as a Republican. But in the name of his Christian sensibilities and faith, and in the name of principles that would ally him with Burke and some of the other great conservative thinkers, but he's still improvisational enough and flexible enough to see certain truths. He sees organized greed at the top? Of course. Institutionalized hatred across the board? Of course. Not just a function of skin pigmentation. Not at all. Now, white supremacy is much more powerful than black supremacy. I mean, I don't think most of us are really wrestling with, oh my God, we got to come to terms with these thick structures of black supremacy that's suppressing me. No, not really, not really. No, you felt that when you walked down the street maybe, but no, black supremacy in an organized form, just as evil as white supremacy in an organized form. White supremacy in an organized form, been around for a long time, right? Just like Virginia Tech, right? First black graduate when? About 60, something. 1872? That's a long time. Wow. That's a long time.
Almost a century.
And that's not a matter of pointing fingers at individual vanilla brothers and sisters. That's saying there are historical forces such that organized greed and institutionalized hatred come together. We see the same thing with patriarchy and so on. But what do you do with it? You see, that's the question. How do you attempt to tell the truth about it? So what happens in our society is, you know, you got Fox News and they're off with their deeply conservative, right-wing, sometimes more and more neo-fascist formulations. Then you got CNN with this little milquetoast neoliberalisms, arrogant, you know, self-righteous, you know, demonizing Fox News like somehow they got a monopoly on truth. And you look at both of them, you say, my God. My God, America grown powerful, grown rich, When will we grow up? That's a spiritual issue. That's an issue of maturity. When will you grow up, you see? How come you don't treat the Yemen situation and the Iraqis in the same way you treat the Ukrainians? Right? All of them precious in the eyes of the God that we serve. Oh, you must be a secret pro-Putin to say that. No, not at all. When you follow Jesus, you're going to be misunderstood. We said the same thing about the Iraqis, same thing about the Yemen, same thing about Bosnia, same thing about
The Rohingya in Thailand.
Rwanda, and so forth and so on, you see. Same thing about the American drones that have been dropped on too many innocent civilians, even with the black president doing the dropping. You see, that's a moral and spiritual issue. Ain't got nothing to do with skin pigmentation, solidarity because he's black, and I'm going to weaponize blackness in such a way that whatever he does, nobody ought to be critical because Fox News is critical. That's what I got left. Everything you say, Brother West, is being weaponized by Fox News. I don't even watch Fox News that much. I don't know what they're saying over there. I'm trying to tell the truth. And I'm speaking in the name of the suffering of anybody, no matter who they are. Dollars in India, they can be Roman in Europe.
So it's, you know, it seems that the type of conversation and truth-seeking that you both embody asks you to set aside your pride. You've referred to that, not using that language, but you've referred to that practice many times. What guidance can you give this audience, and particularly our college students, regarding how to do that in a context where there is often disrespect and dishonor?
It's a wonderful question.
Well, some advice we frequently give is get out of the silos. Get out of the tribe. If you do not have a friend, I mean a real friend, not just a friendly acquaintance, if you do not have a friend who has some very fundamental differences with you about things you really care about, go and make one. No matter who you are, left or right, Catholic, Protestant, Jewish, Muslim, no matter who you are, what your background is, there are intelligent, well-intentioned, well-informed people who disagree with you about things that really matter to you. And you impoverish yourself if you cut yourself off from that dialogue, from that conversation. So you make it a point to go out and make a friend. Now, that doesn't mean just anybody who disagrees with you you can make a friend of, or that anybody you disagree with is worth making a friend of. It's just like the question of, should you listen to demagogues? No. You don't want to shut them down. You want to respect their right for free speech, but you don't have to actually listen to just someone ranting. It's like trying to listen to somebody calling your names. There's no point to listen to somebody calling your names. But there are serious people who disagree with you. Again, it doesn't matter. You're an atheist or a Christian. It doesn't matter. Or liberal or conservative. There are serious people who disagree with you. Not only listen, make a friend. Develop that friendship. Now, you don't begin, Cornel taught me this, you don't begin by talking politics. He's a master of this. Tell me about your family. Where do you come from?
How's your mama
How's your mom? Exactly right.
Tell me about your
Build
mama.
that. Make it a real friendship. Build it. Make it a real friendship. Number two, learn to respect when you see it, irrespective of ideology. Learn to respect and honor people of integrity. People who are willing to take the risks and pay the price of being true to their principles, true to themselves, even when it alienates them from their tribe. In 2016, Cornel had to make a crucial decision and I had to make a crucial decision. He is well known and very influential in progressive circles. I'm not as well known, but I have a little bit of influence in conservative circles. And both of our political parties, the Democrats and the Republicans, nominated people that each of us thought was not fit to be president of the United States. Hillary Clinton, in Cornel's case, Donald Trump, in my case. I saw the pressure that Cornel was being put under by fellow progressives of all colors to go along with Hillary Clinton, to endorse Hillary Clinton, to announce that he was going to vote for Hillary Clinton, because he was otherwise risking the election of Donald Trump. And I don't know if there was anybody else in the world besides Irene West.
God bless him.
Besides me and his mom, who never had a question about what was going to happen there. I knew what was going to happen there. They might as well have tried to move the Rock of Gibraltar. Once Cornel West decided that this was the wrong thing, that going along with the tribe was the wrong thing to do here. It didn't matter how many names they called him, freezing him out, telling him he wasn't going to be invited to things. He wasn't going to move. And then pretty soon I found myself facing the same thing, because the Republicans nominated Trump. And I just couldn't go along with that. So I'm now coming under the same pressure, but I have the advantage of Cornel's inspiration. I didn't want to look bad in front of my friend. But I wasn't going to move either, right? Once I'd made the decision, wasn't fit to be president of the United States, I wasn't going to be talked into it by the argument that, well, otherwise you risk Hillary Clinton. It should be the worst disaster in human history. So, whether you're liberal or conservative, when you see it, even if you see it in a person, in the public light, whether it's a politician, an activist, a scholar, a public intellectual, when you see it, learn to respect and honor that, and then emulate it. Emulate it. Be like that person. You want to try to live up to that virtue. Yeah, it's really about integrity and courage. What's our message to you? What's our advice to you? Exemplify those virtues. And you can work together. Cornel and I have worked together, not just on this gospel of civil discourse and free speech, which we're preaching tonight. We've also worked together on substantive issues. We wrote together, again, we took a lot of heat for this, a condemnation of U.S. drone policy, which we condemned under Republican and Democratic presidents because it simply did not, in practice, conform to the principles which we believe are correct. The body of principles sometimes described as just war theory. Neither of us is a pacifist. Both of us are Christians. But here was an area in which we could cooperate and lend our voices together to a substantive moral cause. You'll find
And rejected by
opportunities
New York
to do
Times, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, all of the mainstream, both establishments. And it snuck in, where was it, Newsweek?
Newsweek, yeah. We offered it was a kind of a little bit, at least in our little small part of the world, a little bit of a kind of newsy story that Cornel West and Robert George, the notorious progressive, the notorious conservative, had found common ground in criticizing an important policy of the government. Now, had I submitted to the Wall Street Journal some fire-breathing article condemning some progressive thing, it would have been published. If Cornel submits to the New York Times some fire-breathing thing condemning capitalism, that would be published. We have no trouble getting into those journals. But they didn't want this. It seems to me a lot more interesting piece, even from just a pure, human interest story perspective. Why did they turn? They didn't want to hear it. They didn't want to hear it. When we wrote a piece together called Honesty and Courage.
Oh, yeah, that's
Honesty
true.
and Courage.
That's true.
Again, we offered it to, as our prescription for what was needed in the run-up to the 2020 election. Addressing the candidates on the specific virtues that we think needed to be highlighted. Offered it to the New York Times? No. Offered to the Wall Street Journal? No. Offered to the Washington Post? No. That one the Boston Globe picked. And it was really only because there's an old school editor there.
Old school editor. She's been holding on for 40 years.
Yeah.
40 years. She was kind of...
And there's a generational issue here that reminds me of this ideological siloed thinking, this tribalism, this narrow. It's worse in the younger generations. In those newsrooms, those old school folk like remember Meg Greenfield at the Washington Post, who she was clearly a liberal, but she would publish conservatives, serious ones, not just kind of straw men sort of things. they're dying out, and they're not being replaced. It's kind of all ideology all the time, on the left and on the right. It's you're either with the tribe or you are in the wilderness. Don't be like that.
No, it's true.
We have a few more minutes, and another question from the audience asks, how can you practice civility to those who are uncivil and are promoting very harmful views? So what advice do you offer?
Well, I can tell you about my experience in Charlottesville, where there was some very sick vanilla brothers, neo-Nazis, Ku Klux Klan, and others. And hundreds and hundreds of them. We had a little small group. We had a sunrise service, and we started out with about 2,000. And then by the time it was time to march, it got down to about 50. And when we got near the statue, it was about 8 of us singing "This Little Light of Mine," you know. So I said, you know, Jesus be with us, keep us near the cross, you know. And so some of these brothers, they had their guns loaded, and you all saw the pictures and things. We were there spitting on us and cussing us out, and one brother walks up to me and he says, Wes, I can't stand the fact you call everybody brother. I just can't stand that. He says, why do you do that? I said, well, brother. I said, you made in the image of the same God that I am, and Jesus loves and died for you just like he loves and died for me. You choose to be a gangster. And I was a gangster before I met Jesus, and now I'm just a redeemed sinner with gangster proclivities. Then his friend just grabs him. Get away from that, get away from that. Because again, you see, when you don't reduce the spiritual to the political, and you don't reduce the ethical to the ideological, there's a number of different ways in which people are touched, because everybody awakes from their sleepwalking in their own time. Nobody comes out of the womb like Edgar's rightness is all. King of King Lear. No. You just a baby. You got to undergo these stages. Readiness is all. Hamlet. No, nobody undergo. Everybody wakes up at a different time. You see? And you never know what can be the catalyst or the cause of that. You see? And so you have to have good timing like a jazz musician. That was not a moment for sustained Socratic dialogue with that sick white brother, right? Not at all. It could be if you run into him in the bus station without his friends and just one-on-one. You could actually end up having a conversation. You just don't know. You see, you have to be open-minded, flexible. This is where phonesis is where practical wisdom and practical judgment plays a role. But I think I think it's almost arrogant of us to think that we are in full control as to when we shut down on another person. We just don't know. So at a particular moment, you might want to engage. But everybody has the possibility of undergoing change and transformation. That's the Christian promise. And it's not just the poor, it's not just the well-to-do. You don't just speak truth to the powerful, you speak truth to the relatively powerless. Because everybody can undergo some certain change. Now, that's not a political program. You still have to have organized forces and structures and institutions and things. But if you're in a moment in which you think that that your witness will not have any impact, and you feel you're in a harmful situation, then that's not the moment for Socratic dialogue. But other than that, we ought to try to pursue Socratic dialogue in every possibility if we can.
Do you want to tell them about the music that the Klan and the Nazis were playing?
Yeah, now what was interesting was that we walked through the park. They got a major section of these sick white brothers listening to Motown. And I said, only in America. It's just like the Klan used to be against our precious Catholic brothers and sisters. We run into David Duke, who's now Catholic, head of the Klan. That's upward mobility American style, right? It's true. So you say, ooh, so that Stevie Wonder and all of his genius, love and the need of love, can touch your humanity, but you want to come and kill us, the people who produce Stevie. Wow, how human, all too human. He is on a continuum with us at our worst. It's not him out there isolated all by himself, demon and devil. No. He's a human being just like when we see these pictures of the vicious treatment of our Ukrainian brothers and sisters on TV, and we say, oh my God, they're just so devil. No, that is us at our worst. That's humanity at its worst, and it's a long and it's not a pretty story of our species. War after war after war after war. How do we cultivate our best capacity? Individual capacity, institutional capacity, intellectual solidarity with those exemplary figures. You see, what does it mean to really engage in a discipleship the way Bonhoeffer talks about it, of a Jesus? What does it mean to take Socratic legacy seriously? What does it mean to engage with the work of a G.K. Chesterton, exemplar of integrity when he's right and when he's wrong, of a Toni Morrison? And it's especially the artists. I mean, I do believe that the artists, especially the musicians, are the vanguard of the species. Now, that just could be humble opinion.
Especially the banjo players.
Especially those bluegrass brothers from West Virginia. But because there's something about the sonic in the human condition, which is a way of us getting some distance from an overwhelming reality of suffering and misery that transfigures our moans and our groans into first noise and then sound that speaks to us all the way down, not just our heads and cerebral, but visceral in our souls and our minds. And we see integrity, vision, and courage in the sound. You see, there's a dignity in John Coltrane's sound that's different than Kenny G. I love Kenny G. You see what I mean? But it's the difference between a garden variety novel and Tolstoy. And we had to be honest about that. You see, that's what standards are. That's what arate, excellence, is. You see. And that's in part what Paideia, education, Virginia Tech, at its best. Now, we can talk about Virginia Tech at its worst, on and on and on. Right? But at its best. And it's inside of us. It's not just in the past and Ed Caldwell's walk, how many miles he walked to get here and so forth and so on. No. That's a tremendous commitment that he had, absolutely. The context, very barbaric. Very bad white supremacy everywhere. Right. Yeah. But even given that white supremacy, Caldwell probably had some cousins who were the cousins of John Brown. Yeah. John Brown killed innocent folk, wrong as he can be, but he loved black people so much he was willing to die for black people, loving black people more than some black people love themselves. And that was Vanilla Brother. Rabbi Heschel the same way. Dorothy Day, I mentioned the same way. How do we keep track of those exemplars? Reading their work, reading their biographies. How did Miles Horton put together Highlander Center in Tennessee? I know our dear sister Nikki was born in Knoxville, I think. How did he sustain it when he had cousins who were in the Klan burning it down? And yet that's where Rosa Parks was 3 months before she sat on a bus in order to stand up for justice. That's where Martin King was. That's where Diane Nash was. That's where James Lawson was. What was it about that Vanilla Brother graduated Union Seminary, studying under Reinhold Niebuhr? I did not know that. Oh, yes, he's a strong Niebuhr. Yeah. But the early Niebuhr, not the establishmentarian Niebuhr. No, not the Niebuhr of the Cold War anti-communist fitting into the mainstream, too well-adjusted the injustice. I'm talking about the radical Reinhold Niebuhr, a moral man in a moral society, the greatest text the 20th century on Christian ethics, not because of his conclusions only, but because of how he got there. We're right back to where we were before. The process, the integrity, the quality of the process of where he arrives. And Niebuhr, of course, had no PhD, had no MA, and went to a unaccredited college.
Huh?
But just like when you all graduate here at Virginia Tech, it's not a question of going to college. The question is, does the college go through you? That's the key. Because if all you get is a degree and a diploma, you haven't been changed and transformed to learn how to die in order to learn how to live.
Right.
I wouldn't say you wasted your parents' money, but I would say that you didn't use that money in the full sense that you should. Because that's what education of learning, wrestling with what it means to be human is all about.
Just
We
a
have-
quick
yes.
word, Sylvester, to the questioner. One of the things about us human beings, or these frail, fallible, fallen creatures that we are, is that we tend to wrap our emotions more or less tightly around our convictions. That's natural. And it's not in itself bad. In fact, in a way, it's good. Unless we had some emotional investment in our convictions, we wouldn't act. We would believe certain things, but we wouldn't act on our beliefs. We couldn't really be persons of conviction in the sense that we act. Whether it's for noble causes, or causes at least that we believe to be noble, or just the ordinary routine things of life, getting the studying done, getting the course prepared, getting the lecture prepared, getting the kids fed and off to school, the normal things that we do. We need some emotional investment. And yet, when we wrap our emotions too tightly around our convictions, then we become dogmatists, ideologues. We make such a deep emotional investment in them that these beliefs become not only deeply held, cherished beliefs, they become identity-forming beliefs. And so when we're in that situation, we will naturally perceive, or think we perceive, any criticism of what we believe, any criticism of what's really important to us, as a personal attack on me. Then we will dismiss a broad swath of people as unworthy to talk to. In fact, just enemies to be defeated. And their views, because they disagree with things that are deeply important to me, that I deeply cherish, will be considered harmful, dangerous. And that, I think, overlooks the fact that especially deep ethical questions, questions of justice, human dignity, are hard. Not all of them are hard, but a lot of them are hard. And reasonable people of goodwill really can disagree with them. And so we have to be willing to acknowledge that someone can be a good person, and indeed a person from whom we can learn, even if they disagree with me about these deeply held, cherished, even identity-forming beliefs. And I've got to resist the temptation to treat criticism of my views as a direct personal attack on me.
Well, we've come to the last few minutes of an amazing evening, and there is one question from the audience that I would hope we could close with, and the question is whether you are ready to die. So I wonder if each of you could give us a response to that question before we go.
Well, I have already died tonight because I've been reborn. I've been reborn. Now, it's true, every morning I put on my cemetery clothes, so I'm coffin ready. You know? Absolutely. But to keep in mind, though, you see that there is no life without death. So we don't want to fetishize death. You see that death is not something to fear when you've been equipped and when you've been fortified with a spirit, when you've been washed with the blood at the bottom of a cross in which you actually underwent a fundamental metamorphosis, conversion, and metanoia in your life. Because spiritual death while alive could in many ways be worse than physical death, you see. Remember in Kafka, the short story, people want to die, but they can't die because it so becomes even more hellish in that way, with no love, no access to quality relations and so forth, you see. So that when we talk about this death, you know, we don't want to view it as if somehow it's just this catalyst to be on the love train. No, it is a complicated process that's part and parcel of our maturation and education. And there's no education and maturation without this dying daily. And so I'm just blessed that I died tonight in the particular way I have.
Yes.
I'm still talking and breathing. But that's in a way what love is. You know, when you fall in love, you know, if your narcissistic self is not in some sense murdered at least for a moment, then it's not going to be a real love.
I feel a little awkward talking about something so personal in front of a big audience, but because of the lights, I can't actually see you.
Yeah, I know. That's
So
true.
it'll make it a
You can't
little
see
easier
your
for me
face. You can't see your face.
to be personal. I live not so much with the fear of death, about which I'll say something in a moment, as the fear of my loved ones dying. I would much rather go first.
Mm-hmm.
I've often said that the very worst thing that can happen to a human being is for a child to pre-decease him or her.
Yeah.
If I ever have a chance to ask God about something, to object, like arguing with God, like in the Abraham in the Bible,
Yeah.
I would say, how can you allow any parent to go through the loss of a child? I saw my grandmother 3 times experience that. It just seems to me the worst thing. And I just pray that I go before my children. That's what I live in dread fear of. My kids have been blessed with beautiful, good health, and I just want them to maintain it. And I don't want to live so long that I predecease, that one of them predeceases. Same with my wife, my beloved wife. I want to go first, you know. I don't. Brother Cornel's
She's lovely too, though.
Brother Cornel's a little older than I am.
He's blessed. He's a very blessed brother.
But I want to go before he goes.
No,
I don't want to deal with the grief.
We'll probably get shot at the same time.
I wouldn't be surprised. And then the some right-wing guy and some left-wing guy both having guns go shake hands.
Yeah, in solidarity.
But having said that, I had an experience in 2015, so I can actually speak. I don't know if it will be like this the next time, but I can actually speak from the experience. It was not a Kubler-Ross near-death experience. Cornel, remember this. I had what's the word the doctors use when they can't figure something out? An idiopathic event. Idiopathic event. It was a spontaneous dissection of the superior mesenteric artery. I didn't know I had a superior mesenteric. I didn't know I had an inferior mesenteric. I didn't know any mesenteric. I didn't know what it was. And it turns out it's a little tributary. There are 2 tributaries on your right side of your body off the aorta. The aorta, the main artery down through there. And this is the lower one. Now, tears in the aorta, spontaneous tears in the aorta are well known. They're dangerous. If it happens to you, get to the hospital fast, and they'll sew you up and save you if you can get there fast enough. Occasionally, there will be tears in the celiac artery. That's one of those little tributaries. But it's almost unheard of that you get a spontaneous tear in the superior mesenteric artery. I had to be the guy who gets these stairs. So suddenly, I'm lying down on my bed, 10 o'clock at night, absolutely nothing wrong. I feel some stomach pain. Within 3 minutes, it's a massive fire across my entire abdomen. My wife had fallen asleep on the sofa downstairs. I struggled to get downstairs, shouted at her, woke her up, and I said, I don't know what's happening, but you have to take me to the emergency room. Ended up in the emergency room, where a brilliant, wonderful young doctor was able to save me. And he did save me with a brilliant strategy. And, but there was some drama, including my going to bed in the evening, perfectly lucid because the opiate painkillers had removed the pain, but not solved the problem and he wasn't sure whether his strategy would solve the problem, where he was very candid with me, and he said, "You may not wake up tomorrow morning." And what shocked me then, and still shocks me now, is that I wasn't afraid. I don't know why I wasn't afraid. I can't say, I'm a Christian, but I can't say that in the moment I had any intense religious dimensions. Maybe that was in the background. Maybe that explains what, I don't know. All I can tell you is the subjective psychological experience was that I wasn't afraid. I remember being most concerned about my family, that I would be leaving them, and I knew that it would hurt them. I flattered myself with the thought that it would hurt them, but that was what, it wasn't the fear of death. Cornel will remember it because then you came the next day to visit me in the hospital, and we had one hospital lunch, and we shared it. We cut the Jell-O in half.
Cut the Jell-O and thing. I remember that.
Now, whether the next time, if it does happen that way, if it does happen that I am told that my death is imminent, I will have the same experience. Maybe I'll be terrified, absolutely, I don't know. But I did have that experience, so I can speak from it directly to your question.
Wow. Well, yeah, those are very moving words and responses. I want to say on behalf of all of us here that at a time where it's been very challenging and difficult increasingly to live in our world, there has been so much happening. You have encouraged us and inspired us. Coming here and speaking so generously about your love for each other, about your friendship, about how you engage each other amidst your differences, amidst the things you share. It has been very powerful, it's been very rich, and we're so grateful that you have spent this evening with us. Thank you so much, and I hope everyone can join me.
Thank you for coming.
We thank you. We thank you, though, brother.
We want to.
Brother.
Thank you for that. God bless you. God bless you. Thank you so much.
Thank you both.
You were wonderful, brother.
It was an honor.
You were wonderful, though, brother. Definitely.
We also want to give thanks to everyone who made this event possible, and we ask that you please consider the post-event feedback survey being sent to all the participants, and that's also posted on the YouTube page for this event. Thank you all for coming, and please have a wonderful evening. Thank you.
Good night.
Yeah, good night. Good night. You all take good care. Take good care.